Hi everyone, this is Ms Richardson here from the English Literature A-Level team, and I am going to talk you today through unpicking a Section C question for paper 1. There will be another video for paper 2 as well. However, Section C questions on both papers are similar in that they both have two texts. So you need to be really selective about what you use from those texts. However, it's important to remember as well that there is no need to compare these texts at all. That is not what the exam board wants you to do. Therefore, you've been studying these texts for a very long time, you know them really well, you probably want to write about absolutely everything you know, and that's not a good idea. You need to select the best possible moments and examples so that you can get the best possible response. Therefore, selection is key, and to do that you absolutely need to look through the question and interrogate it and unpick it correctly. The three-step process that I would recommend to unpicking any Section C question is to identify any keywords in the question, then ask relevant questions about those keywords to work out what the question is really asking you, and then simply go through and answer them. Just a quick reminder of the paper 1 Section C basic question. It will be a to what extent question. You will get a statement and you'll be asked how much you agree with that statement. Now here you will see that I put you can agree to it absolutely, or to the other extent you can agree to it somewhat. My advice and the exam board's advice is don't disagree with the statement. The exam board is giving you a steer here. It's telling you that this is what they think. You can completely agree if you want to, but it would really make things hard for you if you were to entirely disagree with the statement. This is the question that we're going to look at today. So I'll give you a second to familiarise yourself with that statement, and then just draw your attention to the question structure. This doesn't change in paper 1 Section C. You will always be asked to what extent do you agree with this view in relation to two texts you have studied. In our case, that is the Keats tragic poems and Death of a Salesman. Remember to include in your answer relevant comment on the ways the writers have shaped meanings. So obviously we're thinking as well as the obvious literary and structural ways that the writers have shaped meanings, we need to think about Miller and the fact that he's a dramatist, and we need to think about Keats and the fact that he's a poet. So we need to have those in mind. I'll give you a second, just pause the video, read through that question statement, and then press play again. So just to read through the statement again, tragic heroes are so entirely caught up in dreams, they are blind to the suffering caused to others. If we're in the process of identifying key words, then I'd be very, very surprised if you didn't think, well, we need tragic heroes there, because that's the character that the exam board wants you to look at. If you veer off and answer about something else without thinking about this very clearly, you will not get the marks because you will not be answering the question. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video now, have a think about underlining and thinking about what you think the other keywords could be. Press play when you're ready. So these are the words that I have come up with. We're going to leave entirely for now and first of all look at these ones, dreams, blind and suffering. These ones, dreams, blind and suffering, are really rooting you to the texts and to the genre. Dreams and reality is a huge theme in tragedy, especially the ones that we are studying. Blindness, suffering, that roots you within the genre absolutely brilliantly. So you must make sure that you are thinking about those aspects of tragedy when you're responding to the question. Now, looking at entirely, this is what we would call a hinge word. These statements that the exam boards give you are extreme statements. They argue an extreme view, and that is where the to what extent comes in. So it will be quite hard, not impossible, but quite hard to argue that tragic heroes are all entirely caught up, but you could say you agree to it to a large degree. So usually the question will have a word like entirely or extremely or utterly in there. So it's an extreme view and you can then kind of agree to an extent. So that's our hinge word. So now that we've identified our keywords, we need to ask questions about them. Our first keyword is tragic heroes. And now we need to start drawing on our knowledge of what a tragic hero is and identifying them within our texts. So they're the questions that we need to ask of those keywords. Can you think of questions that you might want to ask about the other keywords? Again, pause your video, have a little go, and then we'll see how you've done in just a second. Press play when you're ready. Now, as you get more practiced, I would expect you to be able to go through this kind of process quite quickly, and this will get much easier. But I would expect you to be asking things like, well, is it true that these characters are completely and entirely caught up in dreams? Or is there a little bit of room for manoeuvre there? The idea of what are dreams? Are we talking about metaphorical dreams, actual dreams, ideologies? There is some room for manoeuvre there. Again, there's two things we can ask here. Is this true that characters are blind to the suffering of others? And what sort of blindness is there? Are we thinking about what ways in which characters are blind? Finally, suffering. What is suffering? How does it show itself? Is it physical? Is it mental? These are the sort of questions that you need to be asking. Then you can start identifying these elements properly in your texts. Now comes the part where you really do need to start annotating your question quite heavily. So I'm going to respond to this with regards to Death of a Salesman, and in a moment I'm going to ask you to think about how you would respond with regards to Keats. So if we're thinking about tragic heroes, we have to talk about Willie. I know a lot of students say, well, he's not a traditional tragic hero, but he is Miller's tragic hero. He's a modern tragic hero. We need to start thinking about his elements or the elements of him that are tragic. For example, his hamartia. You could argue that his hamartia is his blindness, his arrogance. There is definitely a fall from grace, whether that is real or whether that is just imagined in Willie's head. You could argue that Willie's greatness is only ever in his head, but he still believes himself to be great. There's also a question about thinking that maybe Biff could be a tragic hero, or are there elements of him being a tragic hero? Is there some sort of redemption at the end? Does he go through a journey? So I'm going to ask you now to have a go at answering those questions that we went through before, and start the video again when you're ready. So this slide is quite involved, isn't it? Again, these are just my ideas. You may have entirely different ideas, but this is just a model of the sort of process that you should be going through. So I've thought about how Willie is actually perhaps not entirely caught up in dreams, perhaps because he contradicts himself, that suggests that he's not entirely caught up in fantasy, and sometimes reality does poke its head in. So here's just some examples of what I think when we're thinking about dreams, Willie's dreams. What is his dream? Please avoid just using the umbrella term, the American dream. That is not specific enough. And we need to think about what that actually means. It means success, it means reputation, etc. We need to think about blindness here and how Willie displays that. And then, how do characters suffer? None of the characters are killed by Willie, but a lot of them suffer mentally and emotionally because of him. So those are my potential answers to those questions. I'm going to give you a couple of tasks that you can now have a go at to have a bit of practice yourself. The first task is thinking about the same question, but thinking about Keats. So we've got the questions there. You just need to apply those to your Keats texts and start to think about, right, which of the poems would be best for me to use in response to this question. This process will help you to do that. Remember, with Keats, you only have to use one of the poems, and often that is the best thing to do because you don't have very much space to write about them. So I would have a go at Keats, and the second thing I'm going to suggest that you do is, here is a further practice question for you. Tragic heroes isolate themselves. It is a direct result of their actions. My first suggestion is simply to apply what we've done so far in regards to this question to Keats. This will help you to isolate the poem that you're going to use. It's always best just to use one poem when writing about Keats, because then you can get the necessary depth. So this process will really help you not only think about the question in detail, but also help you to isolate the poems that you want to use, or the poem, sorry, that you want to use. The second suggestion I'm going to give you is to have a go at a further practice question for paper 1, section C. So here is our statement. Tragic heroes isolate themselves. It is a direct result of their actions instead of outside forces. See if you can go through those 3 steps yourself. Identify the keywords. Don't forget that hinge word, that extreme statement. Ask relevant questions of them and then spend some time, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, answering those questions and really thinking about how it relates to our 2 texts. Okay, I'm sure your teachers will be delighted to have a look at anything that you come up with as a result of this video, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's useful. Speak to you soon. Bye.